Hello, everyone. Hello, happy Friday. Oh, sorry. Whew, I made it. I'm only 3 minutes late, which, is basically not late at all. So I'm good with that. Hopefully you are too. How are you? How is everything going? Happy Friday. Happy Friday. I am super excited to be here. It's been a weird week. I mean, I don't know. How's your week been? It's been weird too, because I am finding it bizarre. But then again, I'm about to travel. And so for me, getting ready to travel always is a bit of a strange type of thing. Just kind of like I have to reorient myself. I'm trying to finish things off. And it's been very, very, very busy times. I've had a lot of interviews. I'm doing a lot of interviews for different podcasts, and I'm working on several different projects at the same time. And so that's catching my attention. Dom and Her has just exploded in a really positive way. No complaints whatsoever. It's all really beautiful stuff. It's just a lot. So tomorrow I have half a day to work on a project with a group of people that I'm working on here, and I'm actually really excited. It's a project that we've been doing in our research group in the School of Method Action, and we've been having to do it a little bit in hiccups. And we just decided we were going to get together and really focus and get into this type of work that we have to do. And I am all for it because I am really loving this work. It's not normally something it's something I haven't worked on in a long time. And so it was just kind of nice to get into it and to have the group in order to do it together is, I don't know, it's just really, really exciting. It's really fun to do it. So in the middle of all of that, of course, I have, like I said, a bunch of interviews that have been going on and the podcast. And so we're back here. It's Friday. We are going to be jumping straight into one of these days, I'm going to figure out how to do the thing I'm about to do right, because I'm about to do it wrong again, because I still haven't figured out. I keep saying, I'm going to go search for the answer of how to do it right, but I haven't done that. Anyway, so it doesn't matter. Let's just talk about what we're here to do. I'm rambling around. So this is Plant Consciousness Commentary. And so we are here to continue the journey that we've been doing. We've been on this super, super cool journey for plant sentience. So let me actually go to the introduction, which I'm still trying to figure out how to do in a way where I am not in the middle of it. If anybody knows how to turn yourself off for a second on YouTube using their YouTube studio, please teach me, because I don't know how to do it. And so I'd love to just I can mute my audio, but I can't seem to shut my video off. So when I go to play the intro, which I'd really like to do, you end up seeing me in the intro. Not a really beautiful way of doing it, but okay, we're going to do it anyway, because that's the way it's going to go. And I still love this intro, so I'm going to play the intro anyway. Of course, when I do this, it doesn't show me the intro. There it is. So I'm going to run the intro, and then we're going to get into what it is that we're going to do today. Welcome to Plant Consciousness Commentary. I'm your host, Tigria Gardenia, nature-inspired mentor, certified life coach, and the founder of the Naturally Conscious Community. As a world ambassador for plant advocacy, I've spent over a decade working closely with plants, sharing their practical wisdom to help you embody the elements of life that nourish your evolution. In these sessions, I explore plant neurobiology, cognition, intelligence, humanities, and the birth of critical plant studies, all through the lens of personal evolution. Together, we'll break down the science to understand the mind of plants and how their wisdom helps us reawaken our own plantness, ultimately living an authentic life as a being of nature. Yay! Okay, I ran the intro, and hopefully it all worked correctly. I still don't know how to use this dang platform. It's really kind of frustrating. I know I need to take time to do it. Like I said, I'm going to be going away, and I'm hoping I'm going to be able to do our commentary while I'm gone. But hopefully then I'll do some study work too, and I will learn how to do this. Because I feel like I really need to. Okay, so let me give you a rundown of what we've been doing up until now and what it is that we're going to be doing today, because I think that that's really important. So Hold on. Okay, there. So here's what we're going to be doing. So up until now, we have been going through a paper and a set of replies. So way back in 2023, let's give you a little bit of a recap, the fast version. You can find 4 other episodes of this that are going to go into this in more detail. But basically in 2023, Miguel Segundo Ortin and Paco Calvo put out a paper called Plant Sentience: Between Romanticism and Denial, Science. And this was a discussion that they put out their, what's the right word I'm looking for? Their arguments for recognizing the sentience in plants. So they talked about what are the different behaviors and cognitive functions that, according to them, makes a plant actually a sentient being, and why we should recognize them as such. At the same time, because they are very cautious scientists, they didn't want you to just kind of like take their word for it. They said, okay, so what we want to do is we're going to put out our arguments that we think that plants are sentient. And what we want you to do is then reply. So it is an open invitation to all forms of scientists. They put this out in the paper that's called Animal Sentience, which is an interdisciplinary journal on animal feelings. And they said, we are inviting all of you to reply to this. We're going to put our arguments down and we want you to tell us what it is. Now, mind you, this came out in about the beginning of 2023. And the scientific world responded with an entire listing of about 20-something papers that were very short papers that all were published as rebuttals to this. Or some of them are for animal sentience, some of them are against animal sentience, some are saying we don't have enough information. In other words, it's all kinds of different disciplines that are just talking about why, this is a thing and what it means. So we have been systematically, we went through the original paper, again, Between Romanticism and Denial, there's Science. And then we've been going through little by little every single one of these papers one by one. Now, the papers are fascinating, right? You can kind of get a feel already from the very beginning where you think a particular scientist is actually, what side of the map he actually falls on or she falls on. They fall on, where, some are absolutely categorically against the idea of plant sentience. We've had the kind of typical players in this field, people like Lincoln Tice and John Mallett, and a few of the others that we hear all the time saying it's absolutely impossible to believe that plants can be sentient, and this is a ridiculous conversation, and we're sick of hearing it from you. There are those people. Then there are those that have been saying, well, we're not 100% sure. This feels like it's not really possible because we're thinking about it the wrong way. And what about nervous systems? And what about, cognition is not necessarily something that we can measure in plants. And is this really even necessary to have this conversation? But maybe it could be. So they're kind of wishy-washy in the side. So there's the hard nose. There's the, I don't really think so, but I'm not going to put a hard no on it. Maybe it's too early for us to have this conversation. Then there are the ones that are like, on the other side, it's like, I can't really say no, but I'm not 100% comfortable saying yes. So maybe we're just looking at this completely wrong. And then they've thrown out all kinds of arguments like maybe it's a language thing, maybe it's a cognition thing, maybe it's a who knows what the heck is happening. But needless to say, something is going on, and therefore we're looking at this all wrong. That's kind of like the end result that's happening. So that's what's going on in that perspective. And then there is this very small subset that we have seen so far that's really interesting, that are saying, hey guys, this exists and you're just looking at it all wrong. And rather than taking it through some of the traditional either neurotransmitters, central nervous system arguments, whether looking at sentience, even from the perspective of some of the indicators that are used for animal sentience, because a lot of those are saying, hey, look, Just because a plant can sense things doesn't mean they're sentient. They're just two different things. And so they're saying, hey, what if we take this out of that realm completely and let's give this an entirely different vocabulary and let's look at different markers. For example, the relationships that plants have, because different than animals who can move around and then therefore have responses that we can read in a different way, maybe the best way for us to understand whether or not plants are conscious or sentient, let's not even use the word conscious, we don't want to scare people off, is to instead talk about the idea of relationships. And so one of the last papers that we did last time was called Complex Floral Behavior of an Angiosperm Family. And in this particular case, we ended up with a completely different point of view, which was along the lines of, hey, we've been observing plants for a long time, and we see how plants are playing off and having these relationships where they're interacting, not just animal does something or other kind of, insect or whatever does something, and then the plant responds kind of as an automatism that happens, but more of we're watching back and forth complex relationships and evolutions, coevolutions that are happening. And in our opinion, this is sentience. So we have the hard nose because there is no brain, because there is no central nervous system, because electrophysiology is one thing, but there are no neurotransmitters in the way that we humans and animals have neurotransmitters. Therefore, sentience doesn't apply. All the way through to, hey, you're looking at this wrong. We're not supposed to be looking at it with the optics of an animal, but we're supposed to be looking at it with the optics of, look at that, a plant, like a completely different thing. So that's where we are today. We have gone through a whole mess of papers. And like I said, you can go into the playlist on YouTube, or you can go to my website and you can actually see all of the different live streams that we've done so far on this question. So today, I'm hoping we're going to complete this because I find this extremely fascinating, and yet we have, many, many other papers to go through. But even so, these papers are fascinating, absolutely. I'm enjoying this so far so much, and I'd love for you to let me know what you think. Of course, if you're here, come do the YouTube things, hit, like, subscribe, share, all that fun stuff that really helps to make this channel continue on forward. Also, go out and check out the podcast because there's some amazing stuff. Not only stuff that I'm saying, but some really amazing guests in the podcast, on the podcast that you're gonna love. So go check out Reconnect with Plant Wisdom. Okay, I'm drinking water because I didn't have time before we started to go grab my tea. I was in a meeting and then I finished the meeting and I thought I would go grab some tea, and instead I had to do a bathroom break. So that was the last drop of my tea. So no tea for today, but that's okay. All right, so here we're going. We are moving into our first paper for today. We have how many papers left? So just so that you set 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, plus there is a revisiting of Calvo and Segundo Ortiz. So I'm not sure how many we'll get through. We'll see. We've been doing about 5 to 6 in our time, but who knows? We'll see how it goes. It depends on whether or not you're interested in finishing these all today or whether we want to head off for the next week. So here's where we are. This next paper is by Alessio Plebe. And it's called Plant Sentience, Timescale Matters. I don't have a clue as to what this one is about. Hold on. Let me share my screen. Let's see. Let's get us started on this. We have share. And then let's set this up correctly. Read mode. So, no, let's go down. Okay. So as always, just as a reminder, we always start off by checking out who the actual author is. Because what we have found is that by reading who the author is, we usually can get a pretty good idea of what direction he's going to go. It's not always the case, but it helps us better understand what is kind of like the motivation that this person is going through. So Alessio Plebe is a professor of philosophy of science, which is the same thing that Paco Calvo is. So we have philosophy of science, and he's in the Department of Cognitive Science. So we have somebody who is a philosopher, but in cognitive science at the University of Messina in Italy. And his main research is on neural computation and artificial intelligence. Now, here's an interesting one. We've had a few people who are working in artificial intelligence and computation. And they're not very friendly to the whole plant intelligence, which is hysterical because it's like easier for them to talk about artificial intelligence than to expand intelligence to other beings. Why? Who the hell knows? Who understands? But let's figure out what this one's got to say. Well, let me see if I can make this a teeny bit bigger. Oh, not teeny bit. Okay. So the paper is, like I said, called Plant Sentience, Timescale Matters. So here's the abstract. Segundo Ortin and Calvo have made a valuable effort in directing the discussion about plant sentience towards a strict scientific path. However, scientific endeavors must reconcile with common sense beliefs. Okay, so as a person who lives in Italy for the last almost 15 years, the comment of common sense beliefs is a huge frame of reference for Italians. Italians have this belief. Now, I can tell you why I think this belief exists, but first, let me give you the belief. They have a belief that there is this thing called universal common sense. In other words, a type of common sense that everybody experiences. And it's really, really, really interesting to think that they believe there is one type of common sense that matches for everyone. I have always tried to explain that makes sense within one culture, and even in the case of Italy, one regional culture, because Italy has so many different regions with so many different thoughts. But for whatever reason, which I will not express my opinion on it unless you ask me, they believe that there is a universal common sense. I don't agree with them at all. I mean, with even me, because I'm Italian in that sense. And but yeah, anyway, so I wanted to face that because that's probably where this is coming from. So although nowadays people tend to accept the idea of animal sentience, this is not easily extended to plants. Duh, that's why we're still here. One reason is the difference in timescale in which phenomena occur in plants and animals. But this still does not preclude the possibility, in principle, of plant sentience in a form difficult for us to imagine. Okay. In support of the rather heretical hypothesis of sentience in plants, Segundo Ortin and Calvo, or S-O and C. I don't know why they always do S and C. S-O and C. I guess it is S and C, because if you were to shorten his name, you would drop the Ortin and you would leave the Segundo. Although it's hyphenated, it's not the same thing. Anyways, I would call it S-O and C. So we've been using S-O and C, and I'm going to continue to use S-O and C. Okay. SO and C present well-focused evidence on plants' cognitive behavior and the ability to signal and integrate information. But scientific endeavors can encounter serious obstacles when they clash with a culture's cherished belief system. Man, isn't that the truth, especially for Italians? Wow, it's a huge, huge one. The beliefs that are probably most resistant to change in the face of are the ones about humans, especially the beliefs that gives us a sense of being special in the world. I am truth being called out. Even today, there is still desperate resistance to the idea that we too are products of evolution by natural selection. We are too attached to the idea of complete free will to accept neural determinism. Gottfried's commentary on the cultural aspects of the consciousness debate is pertinent. Even if one disagrees that sentience cannot be studied scientifically, cultural factors in scientific research are intimately intertwined. Consciousness in other animals was hard-won concession, no doubt facilitated by the spread of humans' affectionate relationships with family animals. It's a good point. Extending such a concession to plants seems far from common sense. There's that common sense again. Told you, Italians really value this term. It is important to explore the reasons why. Ooh, I'm so curious as to what you're going to say are the reasons why, because I know what I think are the reasons why. But what are the reasons that you think are why? One reason that makes it difficult to imagine something similar to their own phenomenal experience in a plant is the difference in timescales at which phenomena take place. For vision, the richest source of conscious experience in humans, a very important factor that I talk about often with my clients and my students, which is we as humans has of our dominant sense is the sense of vision. It is very hard for us to conceptualize a world where we don't see things as they happen, where we don't see you tomorrow or envision the future. Everything, our vocabulary is brimming with terminology that is all around the idea that the most important aspect is to see. So, when, for example, consciousness was being studied, or self-awareness, not consciousness, self-awareness was being studied in animals, for example, certain animals like dogs who have as their primary sense the sense of smell, the whole concept of them not being able to recognize it, the famous mirror test, right? I can't recognize myself in the mirror. Well, of course not, because that's not my dominant sense. I recognize you if your scent pattern, if I can recognize my own scent pattern. So the idea of plants where we don't know what is the dominant sense, right? The sense, is it more a olfactory sense through chemical signatures? Is that the dominant sense? In what other kind of sense could be the dominant sense? Makes it very difficult for us to understand what exactly the plants are living through or experiencing. So for vision, the richest source of conscious experience in humans, the timing for information to become conscious is about 180 milliseconds. At the whole brain level, another thing plants don't have, the typical timescale of the same order of magnitude, about 150 milliseconds. As reported by SONC, two fundamental mechanisms for information signaling in plants are variant potentials and system potentials. These are all electrical responses to a certain extent. Their typical timescale is 5 to 20 minutes. Shorter timescales, from 10 to 200 seconds, are those of the third and least common plant electrical signal action potentials, which are the rapid ones. Those are the ones that are mainly used for like the music of the plants. It's no surprise that the plants with behavior based on this relatively rapid signaling, such as Dionea muscipula, which is the Venus flytrap, and Mimosa perdica, which we talk about all the time, the beautiful plant that closes their leaves, are the ones that are most often signaled out as potentially sentient. Because, of course, we're using human models of speed in order to determine sentience rather than looking at it from sentience from the perspective of those plants themselves. Where am I? Brain dynamics are still at least 2 orders of magnitude faster than action potential signaling in plants, and 3 or 4 orders of magnitude faster than variation potentials and system potentials. The challenge presented by the difference in timescale between plants and animals has been acknowledged by both proponents and critics of the hypothesis that plants are sentient. However, this issue has primarily been framed as a in applying animal-based models to plants, rather than as cultural barrier to accepting the notion of plant sentience. Ooh, I am so glad he is entering into this whole cultural part, because we've been talking about this all along, right? We've been saying that so much of the resistance is that I can't even allow the concept in because of my cultural norms that don't allow for it. In science, timescale can be a dimension along which reality is partitioned into distinct categories of systems and phenomenon. The differences in signal timing for plants and humans are probably not enough to indicate 2 different classes of phenomena from a scientific point of view. After all, these differences vanish in the context of all scales of reality, from the average lifetime of a boson to that of a black hole. By contrast, the difference between plant and human timescales for signaling becomes enormous in terms of our felt experience of time. Our felt unfolding of events and the passage of time is tied to the sampling and processing times of our brains. The central aspect of time in human consciousness was heightened long ago by William James, and the concept of stream of consciousness, and by Edmund Husserl with his inner time consciousness. Current neuroscience of consciousness is trying to relate the continuity we experience across time, which is an entire construct in and of itself, with the discontinuous processing of discrete neural events. It is impossible for us to imagine conscious experience in which the atoms of thought flow at a rate that is 1/100th or 1,000th of our own. The gradual integration into our culture of scientific evidence of animal sentience has been facilitated by familiarity with our family animals. We easily perceive psychological states similar to our own in them, including the feelings of joy and pain. The natural tendency to anthropomorphize is systematically criticized when detected in scientific research, especially in the field of animal sentience and now plant sentience. The error of anthropomorphism is pointed out in other commentaries on SONC's work. Excessive reliance on anthropomorphism is certainly risky and close to the romanticism that SONC wished to exclude from plant sentience research. However, the recent history of animal studies, including studies on sentience, reminds us how the anthropomorphism can offer valuable heuristics in the early stages of research, providing a temporary vocabulary and analogies useful in planning experiments and gaining understanding. Because, of course, we as humans, we move towards what is familiar for us, and it's understandable. And that is why this argument is extremely difficult, especially in a scientific realm where, for example, for people like me and for some others who feel very comfortable relying on something like plant communication, and experimenting and trying to expand that vocabulary of communication so that it's not just, something that is extremely familiar, but is passing even beyond that, but it still comes from a somewhat familiar place of communication. It's a lot easier for us to connect into plants in that way. It's really difficult when you have to break it down into scientific models. And it's what we said at the very end of the last session, which is that we don't have models for plants yet. And we have forgotten that even when it came to humans, we had to create models, but at least we started to create them from a framework that was familiar to ourselves. And then when we started to create for animals, we again built off of this familiarity, as is being mentioned here by Aleppo. And so therefore, it makes perfect sense that the idea of going towards plants where there is no frame of reference, no model that can potentially be the same, is really, really, really difficult. And this is where I get so frustrated with people like certain scientists, like Lincoln Ties and a lot of these other plant biologists who are like, it's categorically impossible. I'm like, how the hell could you possibly say it is categorically impossible when you don't even give yourself the space to explore beyond the realms of your human understanding and your animal understanding, which is, of course, humans are animals. So, and mainly a mammalian, yes, we are somewhat going into some other kinds of invertebrates, but it's still mainly a vertebrate world. It's a mammalian world in so many other aspects. So anyway, anthropomorphism is certainly a tool that must be handled with care. The differences in timescales may confer some useful constraints on our imaginations. In extending the vocabulary of psychological and neural states from humans to plants, the timescale disparity would force us to keep in mind how profoundly different sentience would have to be if it existed at all. So he's being really cautious. He's saying, I am not saying that sentience exists. I am not saying that there is this thing and that plants are necessarily sentient. But I'm also not discounting it because I feel like our anthropomorphism prevents us from finding other mechanisms to understand what sentience in plants would look like. I think that that's a fair. In a famous article, Nagel pointed out that human cannot grasp what the subjective experience of bats based on ultrasound echoes feels like. Exactly. Yet most of us believe bats are sentient. Of course, because they move, they fly, they use this echolocation, which we can't tap into, but the behavior that happens afterwards is familiar to us as animals. It would undoubtedly be even more challenging to imagine the subjective experience, if any. I like how he keeps being really conscious. If any, if it existed at all, what if any, of a plant whose perceived time would have to be hundreds of times slower than ours. Yet, in itself, even this would not preclude plant sentience, even if it felt far different from our own. I think this is a completely fair assessment. And I really do have to say that I appreciate Plebe's way of looking at this, because I think not taking the risk of saying plants are or are not sentient, that's not where he wants to go. And I think that that's fair because he doesn't have an answer. But I do think what he's trying to explain is our problem is we don't have a scale of measure. We don't have a way to measure this. We keep trying to say that if we use these things, it should exist. And if we use these other things, it shouldn't exist. But the truth is that neither of those are really adapted to a plant. I think that's very fair. What do you think? I think that was a good neutral. It's a good starting point. I'm kind of happy with this. I feel like this is a good place for us to actually start because it's somebody who's kind of like looking at it and saying, okay, let's set the path a little bit differently. Like let's create it. Okay. So that was our first paper. I am very happy with that. I feel like that was a good place to start. We are now moving into another paper called, man, there's a lot of Italians and well, the name is Italian, even though the person is anyways, hold on, let me share my screen so you know what the heck I'm talking about. Share my screen. I prepared everything today. So hopefully it's going to go a bit smoother because I prepared. I'm always excited when I prepare. Okay, so this is called associative learning, unmet criterion for plant sentience, which already tells you where they're going to go, right? Because these are people who are most likely, I'm gonna guess because I haven't read it. You know, I don't read anything beforehand. These are people who are guessing that, oh, there can't be, this isn't learning, this is associative learning, which is like a lower scale. This isn't true learning. This is kind of like habituation. This is my guess. Okay, so let's find out who these people are. We have Luigi Bacciadonna. So Luigi Bacciadonna is a postdoctoral fellow, research on animal cognition at the University of Toulouse, and investigates evolution of consciousness and expression and perception of emotions by honeybees. So at least we're not looking at like our traditional animals to a certain extent. So this is already giving us a little bit more leeway, but still animal consciousness. And if you remember, I talked to you that in the Plant Initiative did a really wonderful roundup last year. Was it last year or the year before? I think it was last year, their like school year. And they were talking about how animal sentience arguments are not necessarily the best one for plant sentience. It doesn't really kind of work to create the movement that we want. But anyways, let's find out. Catherine Macri, we'll see. Doctoral candidate, also in the same school, Center of Animal Consciousness. She investigates consciousness-like states such as attention, fear, and metacognition in honeybees. So these are all honeybees, it seems like, people. And then Martin Gyurfa, which is a professor of neurosciences, which most likely means animal brain neuroscience. It's very unlikely they do other kinds. Also animal cognition, learning, memory, and cognitive processes in insects from behavior to molecules. Okay, so all looking at an animal-based foundation. So that's why I said associated learning, unmet criteria for plant sentience. So let's get into this abstract. Thought-provoking target article, SO&C discussed the possibility that plants are sentient, focusing on a series of capacities normally attributed only in non-human animals. SO&C proposed learning as a marker for sentience. We review studies reporting associative learning in plants and find that they either lack essential controls or fail to produce replicable results. These are going to go after Monica Galliano. This is going to be interesting. The capacity to learn has not yet been demonstrated in plants. No, none of this other stuff that plants do, that's not learning. Adapting to their seasons, that's not learning. Knowing when things change and being able to anticipate that change, that's not learning. No. What is it then? Let's find out what they think it is. So it cannot be used to support the hypothesis that plants are sentient. Further studies are needed, but agnosticism about sentience should not deter us from investigating unexpected new capacities in plants. In other words, we're not going to call them and say that they're learning, but they are probably doing something. This is going to be interesting. Sentience refers to the ability to feel. This includes sensory experiences such as smelling a rose or feeling of joy and happiness. These are subjective states of the organism who feels them. They do not necessarily imply metacognitive skills, the ability to reflect upon a felt state, or empathy, feeling others' feelings. It is extremely difficult to determine whether and to what extent organisms are sentient because it is not possible to observe private inner experiences in any species. A possible way to infer whether or what an organism feels is to rely on indirect markers, such as behavioral and cognitive responses to stimuli, which, of course, when we're talking about animals, involve movement. But when we're talking about plants, we have yet to really understand and determine what are the actual behavioral responses other than looking at animal-like plants such as the Venus flytrap and the Mimosa pertica. Do you see the problem in this? In recent years, oh, sorry, I stopped in mid-sentence because it was really frustrating me. Let me go back to that. A possible way to infer whether an organism feels is to rely on indirect markers such as cognitive responses to stimuli or the organism's own verbal report if it can speak. In recent years, behavioral as well as conceptual analysis have focused on the possibility that decapod anthropods, a list which is likely to be extended in the future, may be sentient. It is, and it's going to make eating octopus really hard. I'm just stating. This question has now been extended in plants by SONC. In their stimulating target article, at least they give them credit for stimulating it, SONC analyzed findings on several cognitive capacities common studied in human and non-human animals. They report that these capacities are also in plants, either fully or partially. Crump et al. Have proposed a useful set of criteria to test whether an animal is sentient. This has propelled discussion among scientists and policymakers about which taxa might be sentient in the hope that this might help in making ethical and moral decisions about how to best care for them. Let me just say that that would be the hope, but the given state of the world does not really support that hope. I don't know what would propel certain humans to actually think in an ethical and moral way. Granted, ethical and moral standards, of course, are very personal and therefore they can have many different interpretations. But I find it fascinating to say that for some people, their sense of, this is my speculation, my interpretation, and I'm not talking about anybody in particular, but your sense of fear of losing out overrides any kind of ethical or moral consideration. It's fascinating. Anyways, I'm gonna keep going because if not, we're gonna get into a completely different discussion about the state of the world today in a whole different way. And I prefer this state of the world because this is my hope for the future, to be honest. I study all of this because I do believe that there will come a point where our understanding of the sentience, in whatever form that is, this is my opinion, okay? The sentience of all beings, I think, is going to push us into a new way of looking at the world where moral and ethical considerations will kind of like smack us in the face. And no matter who you are, you will look at the world through different eyes. And also, hopefully, this will create a sense of security where people who, in my opinion, again, my opinion only, are acting out of irrational fear that they live on because, unfortunately, they have irrational fear. Freud would have a blast, I think, in this modern age, studying certain things. And I feel like they would finally calm down and would recognize that they do not have to squish everybody else to keep themselves high because they're afraid of losing things. It's just my opinion, only my opinion. Okay. All right. Where am I? Crump et al.'s framework can also be used to test for the presence of sentience in plants. No, actually it can't. We think it can, but it's made for animals, so no. It is not possible to cover all of Crump et al.'s proposed criteria here. However, I think there is a paper that actually covers this. However, so we will consider only one of them that is also highlighted by SONC, associative learning. Crump et al. Pay particular attention to aversive associative learning, in which animals learn to predict noxious stimuli from neural stimuli through Pavlovian conditioning, or ways they learn to avoid noxious stimuli through operant learning by reinforcement. Crump et al. Explicitly exclude habituation and sensitization as insufficient to meet this criterion. In their extensive review of cognitive capacities of plants, SONC present evidence for different forms of learning, starting with habituation. We will follow Crump et al.'s agenda, setting aside habituation to concentrate on associative learning. Have suggested that there's a parentheses. Associative learning. Besides SONC's main example, the habituation of leaf folding in Mimosa pertica has been called into question because it lacked the dishabituation procedure required to demonstrate real habituation, and because some of the leaf folding data can be explained by motor fatigue. No, it can't. No, it actually can't. Whoever said, the paper is explicit that motor fatigue is not an element, that as a matter of fact, even a plant who stopped given the stimulus of which that plant had learned was not dangerous, when they were given a different stimulus right away, they responded. So kin are not motor fatigued. I disagree vehemently with that. Associative learning and adaptive change in behavior. Associative learning is an adaptive change in behavior. It arises from acquiring information about contingencies between events or entities in the environment. The learning can take the form of modifying existing behaviors or giving rise to new behaviors. It is interpretable as reflecting either conscious or unconscious detection of the contingency. Several studies have addressed the question of whether plants are capable of associate learning. In particular, through Pavlovian learning, this form of learning creates a link between an originally neural conditional stimulus, CS, that anticipates a biologically relevant unconditional stimulus, US, resulting in learning of a new conditional response, CR, to the CS, which is the conditional stimulus. The studies on Pavlovian learning in plants have used Mimosa pertica. Not all of them, though. But they remain inconclusive because they lack controls and have proved unreplicable. There have also been recurrent problems with using stimulus duration similar to those used in animal learning studies, which may be too fast to be sensed effectively by plants. The leaf folding reflex of Mimosa is also atypical of the timescale at which plants usually respond, which is exactly the paper. Hence, results from this species may not be generalizable to other species. An example of non-replicability cited by Estomatic is a study of the pea plant. This is the other Galliano, so notice these are both Galliano experiments. In one arm of the wide maze for 3 days, 3 times a day, seedlings of this plant were kept in the dark for 60 minutes and exposed to attractive blue light, henceforth L. What's the term again? There's too many terms. Unconditional stimulus. The plants grew towards the blue arm by phototropism, unconditional. To establish the Pavlovian association, airflow from a fan, henceforth F for fan, was delivered for 90 minutes of the 60 minutes of blue light exposure. There was an overlap of 30 minutes to better accommodate the plant's sensory and physiological scales. One group was conditioned with both F the fan and L in the same arm of the maze, and the other group with F and L in opposite arms of the maze. After training, the experimental group of seedlings had 3 sessions with the conditioned stimulus, and the control groups had no stimulus at all. In the control groups, all the seedlings grew towards the arm in which the light had been presented in the last training. Understandable, phototropism. In 2 experimental groups, most of the seedlings grew toward the arm in which L was predicted by F the fan. The remaining seedlings grew. Now, mind you, let's be very clear for a second. I don't know if he's going to get into it, but this was something that Monica talks about extensively in her book. In her book, Thus Spoke the Plant, she talks about the fact that at first she thought it was a failure because it was only a 62 to a 69% growth towards the fan, until she recognized, remember, we have to interpret this data, and this is, I don't know where this person's going to go, and we'll see where they're going to go, but you have to interpret the data as a plant would interpret the data, right? You can't interpret the plant the way the animals do. So an animal has a different rate of doing things. If a plant always grows towards a phototropism, right? Always grows towards light, then of course, even just a 62 to a 69% of growing towards the fan is huge, because it means that the plant had to have learned something to move towards that. Otherwise, they would have gone to the thing that they always know. it's just a different way of thinking about this whole situation. The remaining seedlings grew towards the arm in which the light was presented during their last training session. Remember, when not trained in this way, they would grow 100% towards the light. So 62 to 69% that grow towards the fan meant that 62 to 69 of them learned that the fan was actually the light. These results suggested that plant seedlings oriented towards the arm in which blue light was predicted by the fan, thus showing the capacity for associative learning. Unfortunately, further attempts to replicate this finding has so far failed, including one by the experimenters who had performed the original study. Another study mentioned by SONC, I need to get a hold of these like experimental replications, because I haven't yet seen this. I've heard some people who talk about this, but I actually haven't seen any data. So now they cite two of them, and I'm going to go check it out. Another study mentioned by SONC is more interesting in light of Crump et al.'s emphasis on a learned response to a noxious stimuli. The study focused on learning music, a mixture of classical music with natural sounds, such as those produced by birds, insects, and waters, as a predictor of heat stress in seedlings of Arabidopsis thailandia. Music and heat stress were presented twice a day for 5 days. Conditioning consisted of 40 minutes of music and 40 minutes of heat, with an overlap of 20 minutes and an interstimulus interval of 20 minutes. 3 control groups were studied in parallel. One was exposed to music alone for 40 minutes, one to heat stress alone for 40 minutes, and one was exposed to neither. All 4 groups was tested on day 6 with music alone, and variation in heat response genes was measured without any attempt to record changes in responses of the entire plant. Experience-dependent variation in heat response gene levels was observed in various treatments, not only in the groups that received the explicit pairing of music and heat stress. Thus, even setting aside the question of how plants would sense the sophisticated music provided, well, we know that too. That's already been studied. And the more important criticism of the absence of an unpaired control group, which is necessary to demonstrate associative learning, the results of this experiment do not support associative learning in Arabidopsis. Finally, SONC provided further evidence for associative learning in plants, a study suggesting that individual plants of the star-shaped flowering Nassa poissoniana adjusted the timing of their pollen presentation to the actual frequency of pollination visits they experience. Where am I? In these experiments, flowers were mechanically stimulated 3 times to stimulate a pollinator visit. Can I go back a second? When I read this whole study of the music part, here's my confusion. And I'm not saying I don't know enough. I am saying I don't know enough. I'm not saying I know what I'm saying. We just went through another paper that talked about timescales matters, right? I did a study, a very informal study, many, many years ago, where I was trying to teach plants certain things about plant music. So I trained these plants. I had 4 plants, of which one got plant music. How is it? 2 of them listened to music, a playlist that I had created on repeat for, I don't remember how many hours a day. And 2 of them were controlled. They did not listen to any plant music. And then of those, right? So one that had listened to music and one that had not listened to music played plant music, and the others didn't. It was very complex. I need to draw like a little map. But anyways, what I was trying to test for was, did the music that was created by the plants, like the music that was being produced by the plants, change over time based on the plant listening to human music and therefore being able to learn more about the patterns of human music? And the playlist was very varied. It had everything from like modern music to classical music and rock and jazz and country and all kinds of different things. And the control was hard because the plants that were not exposed to music at all, I had to keep them outside of the room. Like I had to put them in a completely different place. And some of the plants died up along the way. It was very complex. But to make a long story short, what I was, again, my habituation time, or my learning time, as I called it, was over a month and something, because we just talked about how time scales matter. I just don't understand how you could think that you're going to do 40 minutes of music and 40 minutes of heat in a day for 5 days, and you're going to get any kind of any kind of results that matter. Like, isn't that just too short given the fact of the way that plants respond to things in their bodies? It feels weird and incomplete. Like you're trying to say that plants need all these other things, but then you're testing the plants exactly the same way that you test humans. It just feels wrong. And I don't know. Maybe I need a plant biologist to like walk me through why they think that 20 minutes and 40 minutes over 5 days is enough for us to see actual true change in the physiology of the plant. I just don't, it doesn't sound like it's enough. It just feels weird. It just feels incomplete. I feel like you should let this test go for 6 months and then test it, or at least 2 months, and then do these tests, because this doesn't make any sense to me. Anyway, where was I? Thus, even setting aside the question of how plants would sense, oh yeah, we read that part, they do not. Finally, SONC provided further evidence for associative learning in plants, a study suggesting that individual plants of the star-shaped flowering Nassa boysoniana adjust the timing of their pollen presentation to the actual frequency of pollination visits they experience. In these experiments, flowers were mechanically stimulated 3 times to simulate a pollinator visit, with an interval of either 15 or 45 minutes. On the next day, they were simulated once, and the movement of anthers aimed at presenting pollen were observed for 50 minutes to determine whether their prior experience had conditioned the timing of these movements. The experiment was repeated on 4 different days. Unfortunately, no control with unpredictable stimulation was performed. This would have been necessary to demonstrate the learning of a temporary contingency. Flowers simulated for an interval of 15 minutes tended to move anthers in anticipation of an expected visitor before the expected time of visitor recurrence. An equivalent pattern, however, was not statistically significant for flowers stimulated with an interval of 45 minutes, thus casting doubt on the conclusion that plants learn to anticipate pollinator visits in an interval-specific way. Just take out the word interval-specific way, though. It does show that plants learn to anticipate pollinator visits, which we also know. Again, it's another thing that we know. I'm so confused. The present commentary thus explains why several authors are skeptical about the existence of true associative learning in plants. Existing studies on plants' associative learning, again, we're using animal response rates to compare plants. It just feels so like wrong, like so wrong. It's so wrong. So wrong. Okay. Inappropriate experimental designs, lack of replicability, lack of proper control groups, high variability in results reported, frequent use of small sample sizes. I agree with the small sample sizes, and of the inadequate time levels, like the timing for this. Although some of these issues could be correctly tested experimentally, the general picture emerging from these studies to date support neither the inference that plants are capable of simple associative learning, nor that they exhibit higher order cognitive processing and sentience. In animal studies, how do you not see that the experimental method in of itself is the problem? It can't show anything, because it doesn't make sense to the way a plant operates. It's trying to adapt an animal study to a plant. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. The lack of consistent reproducible evidence of learning or other cognitive capacities in plants is associated with recurrent debates on the necessity of a nervous system to mediate cognitive behavior. SONC argue that although plants have neither brains nor neurons to support cognition, The discovery of cellular signaling mechanisms that appear analogous to those of some animal neurons can be interpreted as partial support for cognition and sentience in plants. We find this doubtful. Ad hoc analogies and interpretations risk confirming what the proponents wants to see. Plants have signaling mechanisms at local scales and organismic scales, which both allow responding to environmental cues, damage, and other sources of information. However, these mechanisms do not provide an organism with the capacity to learn, encode, store, and retrieve information from memory. This makes no sense. Okay, I am conceding that these experiments that you've cited, some of them, not all of them, do not stand up to the rigorous study that you're thinking of relating to animal studies. But when you look at plants in their natural environment, it is impossible for you to tell me how you explain that plants don't, how can you state that plants don't learn, encode, store, or retrieve information from memory when you look at a plant in their natural environment, when you see how plants naturally move throughout the course of a year, the way that they behave throughout, even just looking at behavior throughout the course of the, heck, I can see behavior and learning from the plants in my own home, just observing these plants day after day, every single day. I can see how they react to the light, how they are moving, how they're learning, how they're anticipating. How are you not seeing this? How are you thinking that animal-based studies are going to give you answers for plants? I just don't understand. Somebody needs to explain this to me as if I was a 2-year-old. I'm seriously a 4-year-old. Okay, I'll give you a 4-year-old because then maybe I know what a plant is. Please, somebody explain this to me. Plants do exhibit goal-directed behavior in their reactions to environmental cues, as well as in signaling mechanisms described by SONC under plant neurobiology, but it is not clear why these responses should require sentience. Why shouldn't they? Why shouldn't they? All living organisms have the capacity to process and respond adaptively to environmental stimuli, yet this capacity is mostly completely unconscious. How do you know? How do you know? Two additional points need to be stressed. One, simple associative learning, whether Pavlovian or operant, does not necessarily entail sentience because they can also occur without it and can never be demonstrated in isolated neural circuits. This is why, among Crump et al.'s criteria for sentience, associative learning is listed as one of several criteria that need to be met jointly. In many living organisms, epigenetic mechanisms such as DNA methylation or histone modifications mediate various forms of memory. These are responsible for dynamic changes in gene transcription underlying memory formation and storage. Epigenetic effects have also been interpreted as evidence that plants acquire memories of environmental experiences that enable them to adapt to the environmental events. Yet, such memories have never been demonstrated in the context of associative learning and cannot be considered a proof of sentience in plants. We conclude that associative learning is still under-demonstrated in plants. Far from discouraging investigations in this direction, however, we welcome SONC's current and future efforts. Properly designed and replicable experiments are needed. I will agree with this. We cannot keep using animal studies as the basis. It just makes no freaking sense. That's why I loved the last paper we talked about in the last session, where it was looking at it in a completely different way, because I think that's the only way we're going to get ourselves out of here. In the meantime, agnosticism too is needed before we begin to attribute sentience to plants and speculate about its ethical implications. And there it is. There's the rub, all the way at the very end. Your problem and your fear, in my opinion, is not the worry about sentience or not sentience. It's the ethical implications of when sentience will be declared. Because it's a win. In my eyes, it's a win. It's a win. I know it's going to happen, and it's a win. Wasn't that one frustrating? At least it was for me. It was definitely frustrating. It's frustrating because, I mean, I get it. That's the way science is done today. Okay, fine. But it's still frustrating to me. It's very frustrating. All right, let's go through another one because I need definitely something that's going to hold on, let me check one thing. I am quite interesting. Okay, sorry. I got there's just lots of stuff going on right now. Let's just say it that way. And I wanted to double check yeah, I needed to double check something. Okay, let's let's find out where this one's going to take me because I'm a little bit I have to say I'm a little bit nervous as to what direction this whole thing is going to take me. Okay, so this is a paper called, hold on, let me share my screen. I'm having this, hold on, before I do that, let me do this. Okay, I'm having this whole, like, I don't know what the right word is. I want to say issue, but I don't know if it's an issue or not, which is that as the day light, as the sunlight goes down, because it's getting dark here, I have various lights and I cannot figure out how to make these lights look good. So I think they look bad, but that's just me. And not that it really matters, to be honest. I mean, maybe it does. Maybe you want a super crisp, super crisp look. So I'm just gonna prepare everything just in case, because by the time I finish this next paper, the light will be pretty much gone. All right, let me share my screen. You're sick of hearing me talk about light. You want me to get into this, so let's do this. And now I have the hiccups, folks. I have the hiccups. I'm not very happy about the fact that I have the hiccups. Okay. We're only on the third one, and I'm already frustrated today. This is not a beautiful thing. Okay. So this is sentience, getting to the root of the problem. Not that I want all of them to be for plant sentience. I just want to be a little bit more possibilistic. I don't know if that's even a word. Okay, so let's look at who these are. We have, I'm going to butcher these names. Christoph, I don't know how you pronounce that L with the little thing over it. So Doliega or something like that. Postdoctoral fellow, Center of Research in Cognition and Neurosciences. So we have another person who is Cognition and Neurosciences, this one in Brussels. And so he is a member of the ERC-funded Experience Research Project. Isn't that a music venue in Seattle? And works on no, I know it's not. That's an Experience Music Project, not Experience Research Project. Anyways, and works on philosophical and cognitive scientific approaches to consciousness, mental representations, and explanation. Okay, so then we have Savannah Sierkerski, doctoral candidate in Consciousness, Cognition, and Computation Group and Laboratory of Neurophysiology. So all of these, and Movement Biomechanics. So all of these are movement, neurobiology, all these things that plants don't do in the same way. And she studies human cognition and consciousness in the context of the brain and body's interaction with the environment. These are going to be against. We kind of know this already. Axel Kleermans is the director of the Center for Research in Cognition and Neurosciences, and he's a senior fellow of the Canadian Institute of Advanced Research. Let's see, the value of consciousness and indifferences between what we can do with and without awareness. Oh yeah, he's there. These folks are not going to be very. I don't think they're going to be very friendly to the idea of consciousness. Well, let's find out. I'm not going to assume. I'm not going to assume. All right. Segundo Ortin's target article. Actually, what about Calvo? You missed him. SONC's target article invites us to consider the possibility that plants can experience subjectively felt states. We discussed this speculation on the basis of functional neurobiology of consciousness, neurons, neurobiology, brains. We suggest that demonstrating plant sentience would require that we identify not only behaviors analogous to those exhibited by sentient creatures. Do you already see the problem with that sentence? Behaviors analogous to those exhibited by sentient creatures. In other words, behaviors analogous to animals who are by definition, completely different physiologically than plants. Oh, we're going to have a problem here. But also the functional analogies of the mechanisms causing such behaviors. No. Okay, maybe. This one's going to be tricky. The lack of clear evidence for any kind of integration between self-states, self-movement, environmental states, memory, and effective communication within plants, already we're starting off like a banshee, suggests that plant sentience remains an admittedly fascinating but ultimately merely provocative speculation. Of course, if your entire philosophy is that we have to find analogous mechanisms to what animals do, then of course, that already discounts the idea that sentience could be something different. This one's going to frustrate me to no end. Oops, wrong direction. Okay. SO&C present a thought-provoking review of the current literature on plant cognitive capacities. We agree that some of their evidence lends some credibility to the claim that at least some species may have behavioral capacities that are explicable as modest cognitive abilities. However, even accepting this weaker claim for the sake of argument would not in itself lend credibility to the much more contentious hypothesis that plants might be sentient. The bulk of SO&C's argument rests on evidence of similarities between animal and plant behavior. It is indeed genuinely fascinating to realize, for example, that once sped up, plant behavior can sometimes appear to reflect the kind of intentionality more typically associated with animals, but that plants appear capable of sophisticated forms of communication. SO&C rightly point out that engaging in this kind of analogical reasoning is one of the main research methods in animal cognition. However, this methodology is not sufficient to establish sentience for two interrelated reasons. Reason one, in favor of ascribing sentience or any other cognitive capacity on the basis of behavior requires that one first identify a set of dispositions and reactions that can serve as strong predictors of the capacity of interest, hence sentience, in one species, or here sentience. Then one must demonstrate their presence in another species. Two, however, since many of the behaviors associated with cognitive capacities in humans and higher mammals, because lower mammals don't count, can be carried out unconsciously, according to you. Observing similarities in behavioral responses alone does not provide evidence for the presence of subjective experience. In other words, I do not recognize sentience, even in some animals. Therefore, you cannot compare plants to said animals because there's no sentience there, so therefore there cannot be sentience there. The idea that sentience comes in another form and in another mechanism and in another way of expression is impossible. Okay, dramatic effect, my own. This is why some researchers have advocated moving beyond merely analogies to finding similarities between the mechanisms responsible for such behaviors in different species. As the details of biological implementation can differ between species, such mechanisms need to be distinguished primarily in terms of their causal functional organization. This calls for specifying the range of functions necessary for sentience, which is why any search for a cross-species mechanism of sentience will depend. And why should there be a cross-species mechanism? On the crucial step of identifying some set of behavior predictors of sentience. Unfortunately, SO&C's evidence and arguments fail to overcome either of these hurdles. Do they even want to overcome these hurdles? SO&C are right that there is no consensus about which biological features are necessary or sufficient for sentience. Yet, there are many viable proposals as to which kinds of behaviors and cognitive capacities might be used as reliable predictors of sentience. I feel like I should skip ahead to the paper that talks about panpsychism, because I have a feeling that that's going to completely change everything. Not only do SO&C fail to evaluate their own evidence in terms of these proposed predictors of sentience in animals, but very few, if any, of the plant behavioral capacities that SO&C do cite have been previously taken to be indicative of sentience. In other words, you've talked about all this cool stuff that plants do, but even when we look at that same stuff in animals, that's not sentience. So therefore, it's not sentience in plants. That's basically what he just said. For example, In their recently proposed framework for studying sentience in decapod crustaceans, Crump et al., there we are again, point out 8 capacities and propose that the presence of 3 or more of them substantially increases the probability of sentience. Nearly all these capacities are linked with responding to or avoiding noxious stimuli. Here, permit me for a second. I have never so strongly understood the animistic indigenous worldview as I do in this present moment. Seriously, never have I ever really understood it to the level that I understand now, which is, and I'm not saying that this is their whole worldview. I'm just saying the way that I'm interpreting and the thing that's like touching me right now is, if I think of the world as sentient and I treat the world with dignity and respect, and by the world I mean all the beings of the world, with dignity and respect, then overall I am creating an environment of dignity and respect. So why wouldn't I think of all of the world as sentient? Because doesn't it just create a better world? Right? I just wonder if I'm a scientist like one of these who is arguing against the sentience of another living being on our planet, a living being that is so important to us and who has provided, sorry about that, so much in our lives. I'm going to like that. No, not white. What do you think? This color. But I am going to lower that because that's way bright. Okay. What is the benefit to humanity, to our worldview, to the way in which we live, in not granting or accepting sentience in the plant world? Like, I just feel like there is no benefit. There is no benefit. It's all a detriment. So why? Why? I don't know. That's just the way I feel about it right now. But you tell me. I mean, I always say, you tell me if I'm off. Anyway. Okay. Nearly all these capacities are linked with responding to or avoiding noxious stimuli. The ability of plants to produce endogenous chemical compounds that may play the role of anesthetics, as well as plant susceptibility to general anesthesia, come closest to satisfying one of Crump et al.'s criteria. But this is clearly not enough for inferring that plant behaviors are driven by felt states. To see why this is the case, we need to look beyond mere behavioral analogies and focus on the functional mechanisms potentially responsible for plant sentience. SONC do cite the work of Klein and Barron to point out that the functions responsible for the emergence of sentience are likely to be multiply realizable. I don't understand that sentence, but they fail to appreciate the importance of the fact that Klein and Barron's argument in favor of insect sentience starts with identifying a minimal model of neural mechanisms. There's that brainy stuff required for sentience in the vertebrate midbrain, and only then proceeds with identifying mechanisms that play functionally analogous roles in the insect encephalic ganglion. The minimal model builds on the works of McAfee et al., Merker, Damasio et Carvalho, and others in the assumptions that sentience results from an integrative process that enables autonomous animal decision-making by bringing together information about the animal's self-state. endogenously generated movement, environmental conditions, and memory of previous experiences. Although some of the research cited by SONC does demonstrate low-level capacities for memory and multi-source stimulus integration, there is very little discussion of evidence in favor of causal mechanisms that could play the integrative role described by Barron and Klein's minimal model. Evidence from plant neurobiology, in quotes, is mostly restricted to similarities on the cellular level. There is no indication of physical structures that could interact causally in a way that would offer multi-scale integration between diverse cognitive capacities. Commentary on the absence of the evidence of plant susceptibility of general anesthesia is an illustrative example, and this kind of intervention lacks the selectivity that is needed to distinguish between targeting the mechanisms responsible for sentient, disrupting all behavioral and cognitive capacities by knocking out low-level biophysical processes. In sum, SONC's proposal that plants might be sentient remains a purely philosophical conjecture, which makes sense because Calvo is a, philosopher. In order to even begin to properly evaluate the hypothesis empirically, SONC would have to choose a set of behavioral criteria that are likely indicators of sentience in humans and other animals, to specify the range of functions underpinning such behaviors and to identify possible causal mechanisms for implementing those functions. Only then could they look for causal functional analogies in plants. Since none of these steps have been completed, the claim that plants might be sentient currently lacks credibility. Well then, so far, it's not looking very good for plant sentience. It really isn't. I mean, today we've done 3 papers, right? Yeah, 3, and they've all been against. Why does it feel like we've done more? Really does feel like we've done more. These 3 are heavy. At least it feels heavy to me. Okay, so we've done today plant sentience, timescale matters. Associative learning, unmet criterion for plant sentience. So plant sentience, timescale matters kind of was on the, hey, maybe the way we're looking at this is wrong. And if we looked at it a different way, we might come to different conclusions. Associative learning, unmet criterion for plant sentience, is saying negative ghostwriter. We are not there. Nope. Plant sentience, getting to the root of the problem, also no can do. Both of them leave the door open, unlike some others, but not exactly feeling all warm and fuzzies. Should we go for one more? I mean, I'm kind of a little bit nervous, I have to admit, of like, where is this going to take us? Is it going to take us anywhere? I kind of need a win. I kind of need a win. Today is really harsh in this perspective. Like, I kind of need a win. So what about you? What are you thinking about all this? Like, is it demoralizing, or does it instead kind of make you feel like you have more to fight for? I don't know. What's the word looking for? It feels like, it just feels like we got a lot of an uphill battle. I don't know. It feels heavy. It feels heavy. Okay, let's go to another one. Maybe this will be the one that changes things around. Hold on a second. No. I'm looking for one. I'm kind of going in order, and there's a part of me that really wants to stay in order. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. Anyway, I'm just gonna go with it. Let's just go with it, folks. Let's just go with it. Let's go with it. We can do this. This might be the last one though, only because I have a series of other. I got called away onto a few meetings, so no, my day doesn't even end here. It's been a long day, and it's not going to even end here. Okay, dissociation, not disassociation. Dissociation between conscious and unconscious processes as criterion for senses. I don't even know which way this is going to go. Let's see. We've got another trio. We've got Ivan Ivan Che. This reminds me of my friend whose name was Fernando Fernandez. I find it always interesting when parents, name their kids with the same name twice. It's kind of interesting. First name, last name, similar. Postdoctoral researcher, consciousness and cognitive computation group. Ooh, this is the same university in Brussels. So this is the Conscious Brain Lab. Brains, another brain-focused person. I already kind of have an idea on which direction this is going to go. The effect in cognitive control and conscious perception. Then we have Nicholas Kupke, who is, he works in Iridria Laboratory. Interesting. Iridria. Isn't that, unless it's a different laboratory? I have a friend of ours. I worked with a group that has a company called Iridria, which is a really cool constructed wetlands company in Florence. Awesome people to work with. Awesome. So he investigates, I don't think this is the same one. He investigates collective intelligence in human groups, of course. And then Axel is the same professor who is probably their what's it called? Their overseeing professor. I know there's another name for it, but I can't. Anyways, this is all coming out of the same laboratory that we've already read one paper from. So this is probably going to be another, again, negative ghostwriter. So anyway, let's see where this takes us. The abstract, which is very important. Based on the literature of human consciousness, we suggest that to demonstrate sentience in a system, one needs to demonstrate both conscious and unconscious processing in the system. Major theories of consciousness require the existence of both conscious and unconscious processes. Sure. Contrasting effects of conscious and unconscious processes have been successfully used in human studies. We're not talking about humans. We're talking about plants. And have begun being applied in animal sentience research again. We're not talking about animals. But let's see where we go. SONC describe plant behavior that presumably involves sentience. The problem, man, we didn't even get through the freaking second sentence. No, without introducing the idea of no. The problem is that the cognitive capacities observed in plants cannot be a reliable source of evidence for sentience on their own. Since plants also cannot report on their subjective states, well, to you they can't. To me, they can. This is where I have an advantage that you don't count for anything. But for me, it's a massive advantage. Identifying plant sentience becomes challenging. Yes, I agree with that sentence. Based on the consciousness literature, we develop an argument that to ascribe sentience to a system, one needs to show both conscious and unconscious manifestations of the system. This view is based on a theoretical and methodological argument. Given that potential criterion for sentience were primarily developed in human consciousness literature, hence our problem, we will use that literature to establish the argument. That makes no sense. That makes no sense. Makes no sense. How can you use human consciousness literature as the basis? It just... Okay, I'm just going to go through it. I'm going to plow through it, folks. I'm going to plow through it. Theoretical argument. Psychological and neuroscientific theories of consciousness describe consciousness in contrast to processes that can occur unconsciously. According to the global workspace theory, the brain contains multiple distinct modules that operate entirely unconsciously. Consciousness arises when a network that facilitates communication between isolated modules is activated. Again, we're using human models. The theory clearly describes features of both conscious and unconscious behavior, as well as the distinct neural signatures of conscious and unconscious cognitive processing. Likewise, according to the theory of higher order thought, a representation can only be conscious representation if it is itself a target of another high order representation. For example, a pattern of activation in the visual cortex, which of course is again human-centric, triggered by an image of a bottle remains unconscious until it is the target of higher order representation whose contents are, I am now seeing the bottle. So in other words, if I just look across the room and my eyes pick up a bottle, that doesn't mean anything. I have to think, oh, look, there's a bottle. And then all of a sudden it becomes consciousness. Does that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense. Okay. The higher order or meta representation itself remains unconscious. Hence, higher order theories of consciousness requires the existence of the unconscious representations alongside conscious ones. Finally, according to the recurrent processing theory, information processing remains unconscious unless recurrent activations are involved. How do you measure that in plants, though? Methodological argument. Unconscious processing in humans, who we're not talking about now, is often studied through a contrastive approach that aims to dissociate what one can do with and without awareness. For example, the whole field of neuroscience of consciousness has been focused on finding dissociable signatures of consciousness and conscious and unconscious processing in the brain. In humans, demonstrating qualitatively different effects of conscious and unconscious stimuli was proposed as a behavioral measure of conscious awareness that goes beyond simple above-chance performance in the task of interest. Many studies have shown that conscious and unconscious processing produce different or even opposite behavioral effects. The same approach has begun to be used in animal sentience literature. Again, all mechanisms that go through a brain. Plants don't have them. So, how are you adapting this? For example, Ben Haim et al., using a curing paradigm where rhesus macaques identify, macaco. I was just talking to macaco yesterday. Identify the location of a stimuli presented. The location was cued by either a supraliminal or a subliminal visual cue. The authors found that the supraliminal cues speeded correct detection of the targets, while subliminal ones slowed it down. Dung lists such double dissociation between conscious and unconscious processes as a strong criterion for animal consciousness. A possible plant context might be to try to contrast processing of external stimuli that have local effects in a plant to processing that leads to larger coherent movement of the plant. On the basis of the above arguments, we suggest that anyone attempting to demonstrate plant sentience empirically begin by developing a workable dissociative paradigm. How the hell do you do that in the timescale of plants? I am so generally, what's the right word? Confuddled, confused, astounded, perplexed as to how these scientists write these papers that in some ways say a lot and say nothing, but that's like, hey, here's the way we do it at humans and animals. Now you do it in plants, when plants have an entirely different mechanism. Like, seriously, is that useful? Is it useful? Am I just being harsh? I feel very jaded today. Maybe because all the papers we've gone through so far have been a nay. Like, is that why? I don't know. It feels like everything has been so no. And everything in my, it's like, meh, nope, 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 nope. All right, I said that was going to be the last one, but I lied. I'm going to do one more because I keep hoping that one of these is going to take me to something is going to take me into a belief system that, yeah. Oh my goodness. I don't know, man. I'm feeling very like, yeah. Yeah. I am just feeling very much, I don't know. I feel like this is all, it's a little bit depressing. It's depressing because I feel like science, of course, I am biased that I want plants to be considered sentient. Okay, let's just be honest with that, right? I have my own biases, I have my own reasonings, I have my own things that I want to see. But at the same time, I want there to be debate. And this doesn't feel like debate. This feels like smackdown. Like, I just don't feel like there's debate on this. This is like, let me tell you why you're wrong. And I'm going to use animals and humans to prove it. And I feel like that's just so, I think that's the part that's kind of got me a little like, okay, I'm hoping. Let me be hopeful. This is the Department of, okay, well, I don't know. This is a professor of animal welfare. I don't know if this is going to help me. Donald Broom, please give me a little bit of, give me some hope, okay? Concerns a scientific assessment of animal welfare, cognitive abilities of animals, ethics of animal usage, and sustainable farming. Maybe, but this is the limits to sentience. So maybe we'll get into a slightly different discussion here. Okay, this is what I'm hoping for. Okay, maybe you're gonna. Oh no, sorry, I just screwed that up. Excuse me, I put it the wrong view. Okay, maybe this is gonna be. I'm hoping. Okay, I have hope. I need hope right now, folks. I need hope. Okay. There are many parallels between cellular function and plants. Plants can have complex interactions with their environments, but they lack a central nervous system. We already know this, which is a prerequisite for sentience. In animals, why is it a prerequisite to find sentience in plants? It's not. In my view, the suggestion that plants are sentient is not only empirically incorrect, but potentially harmful to the effects of in the efforts to protect the welfare of sentient beings. Dude, folks, I'm not sure I can handle this. I can't, because the idea that it would be harmful to other sentient beings to recognize the sentience of plants. Folks, what do you all think? I don't know. I'm okay. Okay. Help me change personality. Help me find a new personality in me that's more curious and hopeful and sees things in a completely different way. Because I totally need a new way. I need a new way of interacting with this. I need to experience this in a whole new way. Folks, help me out here. Help me. Sentience in law. We're not starting off well. The use of the term sentience in law, as well as in science and philosophy, has already been beneficial effects to those animals that are sentient because, of course. The European Union has referred to the animals used by humans. Do you even read that sentence? The European Union has referred to the animals used by humans as sentient beings since the Treaty of Amsterdam, and has taken this into account to some extent in making policies and laws. Very few account, okay? Let's be honest. The Animal Welfare Act of New Zealand has detail about the use in law of the term sentience, and other countries have followed their lead. However, the benefits of the concept of sentient would be eroded if it were used too wide a range of organisms. No, folks, it is impossible for all beings that are alive to be sentient because that would erode the benefits to some, the ones we've identified now. Wow, I am really jaded today. I'm so jaded. Oh my goodness. They're so jaded. However, while the proposal by SONC usefully draws attention to responses by plant cells to external events, like many other commentators, I consider the suggestion that plants might be regarded as sentient to be scientifically incorrect and potentially harmful to sentient beings. How the fuck is it harmful to other sentient beings? I just don't understand. The harm could ensue if the whole concept of sentience were undermined by a view that much of what is living is sentient. Oh my goodness. I am going to repeat that sentence. I'm going to repeat it with the microphone very close to me because I'm trying very hard not to scream. And if the microphone's close to me, I will worry about hurting your ears and therefore will not scream. The harm could ensue if the whole concept of sentience were undermined by a view that much of what is living is sentient. In other words, talk about colonialist thinking and human exceptionalism, or in this case, sentient exceptionalism. Sentient exceptionalism,